The East Coast Museum of Technology is located in Makaraka, around 5 kilometres from Gisborne Station on the former Moutohora Branch. The branch opened in 1917 and closed 42 years later in 1959. Most of the collection comprises old buildings, home appliances, cars, fire engines, trucks, and many other things relating to the Gisborne area. Unfortunately, they don't do train rides at this museum, but you can still see their small collection of railway artefacts on site. We visited the museum on the morning of Sunday, June 4, 2023. Entry is reasonably priced at $10 for an adult ticket. This is a non-profit museum run entirely by volunteers, and I'm making this video in the hope that it brings more attention to what I think is one of New Zealand's more obscure museums. The, for want of a better word, reception is located in an old house, and of course this is where you go to pay the admission. And facing the desk is this display of an old-fashioned kitchen. The house itself used to be located in Gisborne itself, on what is now the site of a fried chicken joint. I was initially confused as to what this thing was, but apparently it's the remains of a vertical boiler locomotive whose history is unknown. The label next to the entrance reads, "Sledge House, so named because they were built on timber skids. In brackets, see underneath the sides of the house." This type of house was used by early settlers' families who moved them from farm to farm in search of work. They were usually moved by teams of horses or bullocks. Quite a fascinating concept if you ask me. And the part about early settlers reminds me of the opening lyrics to the Dire Straits song Telegraph Road. Here's an old printing press that was last used in 1973. Although even without reading the label I could tell that this thing hasn't been used in ages. Incidentally, the local newspaper, called the Gisborne Herald, unfortunately stopped printing locally in early May 2023, with the printing now taking place in Auckland. To be honest, I can't say I'm surprised that it's come to that. In one of the nearby barns, there is a collection of old cars, including this 1960 Austin Mini. This is the same type of car that is famously driven by Mr. Bean, although this one is not the same colour. This vintage fire engine reminded me of the Dad's Army episode, Brain vs. Brawn. That's Season 5 Episode 10, by the way. Although this is not the same design that prominently appears in the episode. I thought this car in particular was quite fascinating, because it is an Austin Allegro. Apparently, this is one of the designs that killed British Leyland, and I didn't expect to see one here in the smaller land down under. And yes, that nickname is partially a Men at Work reference. Now this was quite a surprise. Having watched several videos from Laurie's Mechanical Marvels, I thought this particular fire engine looked an awful lot like his Jupiter. On the other side of the museum, just down from that sledge house we saw earlier, there was what felt like an old classroom full of old computers. I say it felt like an old classroom because there was a blackboard on one of the walls. Meanwhile, the next room was a display of older televisions. And quite frankly, I thought it was amazing to see how far technology has advanced in the last 100 odd years. I mean, just look at some of these older telly designs. You certainly couldn't get access to streaming services on those things. Now we're out at the railway yard, where we find the station building that used to reside at Moutohora on the Napier to Gisborne line. Inside the building, There's a collection of railway memorabilia called the Burns Collection, if I recall correctly. Presumably not the property of Montgomery Burns, because I wouldn't have thought he would have any interest in the railways. Sitting just across from that station building was this little Davenport 040 saddle tank, built in 1921 for the Public Works Department as their number 526. She has apparently been at the museum since 1999, but I could tell that she hasn't run under her own power in many, many years. A bit like Duke the Lost Engine, after he spent all those years in the buried shed. Curiously, there were 2 locomotives stored under cover in a nearby shed. One of them was Drewry DSA 222, built for New Zealand Railways in 1953. She remained in service until around 1983, having spent some of that service life based in Gisborne, and she arrived at the museum in 1998. Sitting next to DSA 222 was this delightful little Ruston and Hornsby 25/30 horsepower shunter. I think this one was works number 166062, built way back in 1934 for service at Tokomaru Bay. She originally ran on 3-foot gauge track, but has since been converted to 3-foot 6-inch gauge. She's aesthetically very similar to some of the narrow gauge Rustons I've seen in LMM videos. And that was our trip to the East Coast Museum of Technology. Based on my experience, not sponsored by the way, I think it's a great place for anyone, especially families, to visit if you're in the area. I will leave a link to their website in the description.